Suns fans, you know what time it is in the PHX.
Empire of the Suns.
Phoenix Suns.
Empire of the Suns.
The Empire of the Suns podcast is brought to you by Sonic. Drive to your nearest Sonic location and don't forget to order your half-price drink or slush anytime in the Sonic app.
Hello there, and welcome to the Empire of the Suns podcast. My name is Kellan Olson, joined, not as always, by Kevin Zimmerman. We told you this, you fools. You should have listened to me when I told you if Mike Budenholzer news or any other news was to break shortly after the season's end, we were going to put out the bat signal. And there it is. Sam Cooper, S. Cooper Hoops on Twitter. You know him as from the Timeline podcast, half of the Timeline pod. He's filled in nicely, I believe, once or twice now. Mike has filled in a few times as well. Mike's actually going to be on at AZ Sports Night on Twitter tonight, Arizona Sports at Night. That's the name of the show. That show says. So if you want your fill of both Timeline guys, we're getting them both on Arizona Sports content today. What's up, buddy?
Kellan, this was, first of all, honored to be here. Thank you for having me. This was such an important occasion that I'm out of witness protection for this one. I'm appearing on video for the first time. Last time I appeared on your podcast, I was not on video. And someone did ask me if I was in witness protection. So this is just confirmation that I am not. I am here. I'm ready to discuss. You were just describing this to me off camera as a go day. A lot happens today. There's a lot to talk about. So I'm just kind of happy to go with whatever direction you want to take this. But I think what we both know is that this is just the first step in what is going to be a very long summer and is like surely just the first domino to fall.
Yeah, man. So Mike Budenholzer fired this morning. I think that this was just to talk about timeline perspectives and everything, no pun intended. The Vogel one was where we were waiting for almost like what felt like a couple of weeks, actually, like that HBO press conference goes through. That was bizarre, where like he's not named specifically. He refers to it as the head coach instead of Vogel, and we're kind of like, okay, what's going on here? But they go pretty much immediately with firing Mike Budenholzer. And where we have to start, I think, with this, Sam, is all of these types of conversations, just like the conversations that you and Mike are probably going to have when the Suns get rid of Bradley Beal, when they get rid of Kevin Durant, is, I don't know how you guys feel, but you're probably not going to be targeting blame on one person specifically. It is the old pie chart here where you divvy up your chunks. How big is your chunk for how Mike Budenholzer did this year and how his coaching effort played into the year that the Suns had?
Yeah, obviously it's hard anytime you want to ask someone to like divvy up percentages, right? None of us can really effectively do that with our position, as you know, you're in the locker room obviously a lot more than I am, but I'm sure even it's hard to designate a certain percentage of the blame to a guy like Mike Budenholzer. That being said, look, he's not my first, second, or third reason exactly why this season went wrong, I guess, but he still had to go. It was still indefensible the way that this team was run. I think in particular, the difference between Bud versus Frank Vogel, who in hindsight, I mean, I was kind of a Frank Vogel defender last year too, but especially in hindsight was not that bad, is really with Bud, what you want to see from a good coach is being able to get something out of the sum of your parts that's like more than the amount of talent that is on the roster. Obviously, what we've seen with Bud is the complete inverse of that, and a really talented roster that he just wasn't able to squeeze any production out of. And it was the failings of the role players and the way in which he abandoned the youth on the team, hiding Ryan Dunn for multiple months, hiding Oso Ighodaro for a large chunk of the season, having to be forced to finally insert Colin Gillespie into the rotation and later into the starting lineup. Those are the things that most disappointed me about Bud. They're not obviously the biggest reasons why the season as a whole failed. And, you know, to talk about that, you have to address the $150 million elephant in the room, which is 90% of your salary cap going towards Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal. And that's where it becomes a discussion of, is there blame to be had on Mike Budenholzer's part for the way in which he lost maybe those three guys in the locker room? Sure. Insofar as there was some blame to be had on Frank Vogel's part and Monty Williams' part as well with those guys. But at the same time, the word coach killer is coming up a lot more for all of these guys, you know, Book and KD in particular. For Book, Monty Williams is the only coach he's ever had for more than one season. For KD, it's 5 coaches in 6 years. I don't know how much you can deny it for either of those guys anymore. I don't know how much you can just have the like take your ball and go home kind of nonchalant leadership style when you're making $50 million, $60 million on a team anymore. I don't know how much longer we can kind of go without trying to hold those figures accountable as well. So to be clear, I was very disappointed in Bud. This needed to happen. It was coming. But between, all of that stuff and the lack of leadership from the best players on the roster and the really poor roster construction and the meddling from, the ownership and C-suite executive level, like there were just too many issues to list with this problem. And that's why it's just one domino.
So I think this year's been really interesting to look at in hindsight, because I think that it is much easier to criticize the players this year, because last year it was like the coach just sucked. Everything just didn't come together because, they didn't listen to the coach, and, they'll get a new coach and everything. Ooh, Mike Budenholzer, regular season success, 50-plus wins, no matter what, every single year, guaranteed, baby, hit that over, let's go. It was so easy to talk yourself into this team.
They're going to shoot threes, and you know what? That's kind of his one success story. They did sort of shoot threes this year, so I'll give him that. I will give Bud that.
In my column on ArizonaSports.com, though, I pointed out how I'll get to that in a second, actually, because with the coaches, criticizing the players was much easier. But this year, I think it was much easier to criticize the job that Budenholzer did as well, as opposed to just a lot of Vogel's problems kind of being shrugging and being like, well, they didn't listen to him. And that's certainly been part of the reporting to come out today. It's no surprise to have a bunch of reports say that the locker room lost buy-in, he didn't connect with the players, all that kind of stuff. Those are the types of things where the intricate details we don't know, such as Chris Haynes' report that you reacted to in a way that makes sense to me. I think it's logical for your response to be that as a fan, which is Bradley Beal being asked to play like a Drew Holiday-esque role and being offended by that. And everyone listening to this podcast forever knows I'm the biggest Drew Holiday fan in the world, and being compared to Drew Holiday should be a compliment. Apparently it wasn't for Brad, according to Chris's reporting there. But all of this is to say, like, all of these things that happened behind the scenes, whatever, you just go back and watch this team in mid-December, turn on a game from any point in that month span from mid-December to mid-January, and you're going to see all of the warning signs of, like, is this about to be a terrible defensive team? What's going on? You remember 10 games in, we were like, oh, this is going to be, like, a good defense? What's going on here? And then they were terrible for the rest of the year. Those signs started to show, and then they stopped shooting threes, too, Sam. They were, I believe, top 10 in three-point attempts for their first 25 games, and then from a mid-December point to a mid-January point that lasted 18 games, they were 29th. Like, they just stopped taking threes, and that is just direct lack of buy-in to a style of play. And that's the midway point of the year now. So now you add up 24 or 25, 18, you're at 43 games. You're halfway through the year, and your team is giving up on at least one part of your identity. Two, if you want to count defense, and that's totally fine. So the signs were there, and we sort of knew it was bad, but it was just a matter of how bad it was. And it's funny, Sam, because when this hiring happened, a lot of the reaction was, oh, you got your guy now, 5-year contract too. He's not going anywhere. Who cares what happens this year? And then the year plays out how it does. Go ahead.
I don't know if we should. I don't know if this should be our reaction, because maybe I'm just setting myself up to be fooled again. But 2 months from now, when the Suns hire another coach or whenever it's going to be, it's not going to be in the next week. I'm going to do the same thing.
Yeah, me too.
I'm going to say Steve Nash, 5 years. Well, this time there's really no way, right? There's no way he's going to get rid of him in another year. And we'll see if Ishbia calls our bluff or not, but I just know we're going to do it again.
Yeah, it just feels like a very unstable time, to say the least, where we just don't really know what is going to happen, except we know the chances of these things happening. Like, could you imagine talking about the wave and stretch under any other owner in the league with Beal? And we're sitting here being like, yeah, it's probably going to happen. They're probably just going to do this. It's created an interesting dynamic in terms of analyzing the team. For sure. I wanted to ask you about something that I wrote about in my column on ArizonaSports.com, which is, pod listeners know this somewhat about me, born and raised here. The line in the story that I use is I was actually a toddler at the Madhouse on McDowell, which was the Coliseum that they played in, Sam, before America West Arena. I got roots there. Yep. I got roots going to see the Barkley teams. Obviously grew up watching the Nash teams. So a lot of my love for the sport and covering the sport, watching it, is attributed to this franchise. And what was not frustrating for me, but embarrassing to watch for me over the course of the full season was someone with a similar connection to this franchise in Mike Budenholzer, who had these roots to this organization, who spoke a lot on these just be so tepid after these games. And I am not the media reporter being like, you need to talk to us for 13 minutes every time, and you need to call out the players every time they do something wrong. But I'm sitting here saying, beyond the media opinions or whatever it is, at a certain point, there needed to be a realization from him, in my opinion, where you're beyond like talking to the media, and you're talking to the fans more than you're talking to the media, if you're being honest at a lot of these things. So for Book to come out and talk about the team more honestly the way that he did over the last 6 weeks, I'm sure that meant something to you guys. You never got it from this guy who is a Suns fan like you, or was a Suns fan like you growing up. How much did that frustrate you over the course of the year? Because I know it frustrated a lot of Suns fans, and for me, as someone who like takes a lot of pride in this being a basketball town and covering the basketball team here, Sam, it made me a little bit angry. From an objective standpoint, it made me angry.
Right. And I know, I'm glad you brought up the fact, because I know you're absolutely not one of those old school 40 years skin in the game type reporters who's like you don't cover baseball, Kellan. Well, actually you do, but you're not a baseball reporter when you cover basketball. I think baseball and basketball, there's a massive difference in the tone of the coverage. You know what I'm talking about, of course. Maybe just a generational divide. But with Bud, there was absolutely, at a certain point we were throwing out conspiracy theories like, does he want to be fired with the way he is addressing the media? And just the lack of enthusiasm, the lack of energy, all of it. We were criticizing it from the players too, but from Bud himself, it was infectious, the way in which it felt that there was no energy coming from him whatsoever. So yeah, I think probably, when did I get there? Like by February, because January was an interesting stretch for this team. We kind of knew that they were playing a cupcake schedule. We kind of were able to talk ourselves into this notion that they were starting to beat some bad teams. That
Jimmy's
of course
coming. Jimmy's coming, baby.
I was never fully on board Jimmy. And look, the one thing I'll say about Jimmy, Golden State got Jimmy. It made them way better. They're still in the play-in. So the Western Conference is just a brutal conference. Shout out Harrison Barnes for making that happen.
They should not lose that game on Tuesday or Wednesday, by the way. Don't do that. That's a pretty big game for them. Pretty big.
We'll see. January, this team won some games. You could kind of talk yourself into, okay, they got their mojo back. They'll do something at the deadline. They'll go get Nick Richards. They'll be fine. That didn't work out, by the way. We don't need to talk about that today. By February, it was back. They were playing good teams again. They could not beat a single playoff team. Maybe once or twice. I think they beat the Warriors in there somewhere.
It started for the most part, with they could not beat a playoff game, Sam, remember? Sorry to cut you off, but February was like we're out of January, and at the start of January, they were 15-17, and then they ended the month at 25-22. So there was some momentum kind of building there, a little bit 10-5.
There was no, and they were coming out against flat consistently against good teams, no preparation. They were one of the worst third quarter teams in the NBA. I don't have the exact stats on that. They might have been the worst third quarter team in the NBA net rating. You don't have to look that up right now. But I also, like, what was the game, Kellan? You would remember better than I. What was the game where Kevin Durant was talking about how they didn't have a zone package? It was like at some point midway through the season where a team went into a defensive zone against the Suns, and he was like, well, what do you expect?
Cleveland.
You don't have a zone package to counter. Was it against Cleveland?
I think it was Cleveland,
It was moments like that where it's just like, oh my God, how can these guys even pretend? Like, they're not even pretenders. They, you go into the season thinking they're contenders. They're not even pretenders. They're in an entirely different tier of unserious basketball players, basketball coaches, and they just don't have a chance. And we arrived there far too soon, I'm afraid.
And Sam, I'm going to do something brave here. I'm going to raise my hand. I'm going to defend Kevin Durant. You ready? Here we go. I'm going to
go ahead.
Right in. I felt like he was overcompensating at times, where like people would see like the fiery exchanges between him and Budenholzer, which I didn't read much into. Like it is what it is. I don't think it's anything more beyond what you see, which is frustration at how things are going, and frustration like inside the weeds of it, probably frustration at the lack of adjustments, which is something that Budenholzer was criticized for heavily at the time. But he would come out and be like, there was that one game where he was like, I thought Coach coached a perfect game. And I'd never heard a basketball player say that before. And at times I just felt like he was really trying to like support his head coach through the media, like sort of the opposite in ways with Budenholzer, where it was just so level and monotone and just stuck in the slightly optimistic tone that it was on autopilot for the last 3 months of the season, where he felt the need to get even more optimistic about the situation. Not optimistic, but just like positive about the job that Budenholzer was doing and try to show support to his head coach. Like there was the book line at the end of February where it was like, okay, like that certainly matches everything we're hearing right now. But outside of that, it wasn't really much on the surface level there. And I think like to be like more broad and just more like down to narrowing down what we're talking about here, Sam, it is 2 straight years where they have completely failed, both Vogel and Budenholzer, to like identify what Suns basketball is. And that's where, again, we run into the difficult area of this discussion, which we're not going to spend time in on, like, could any coach have done this? Was this possible with this team? Was it possible with these 2 guys as your star players to get enough buy-in to build a system, or were you going to get it for 20 games and then in mid-December they're going to play their brand of basketball instead? That's sure what felt like what I was watching, to be clear, but I can't sit here and be decisive and act like I know exactly what was going on. But that's got to be, like, in terms of looking ahead now, Sam, you have to have this front office be extremely better, first of all, because the biggest failure of the Budenholzer hiring, you enjoyed that one, huh? The biggest failure of the Budenholzer hiring was it had to be an accountability guy. How many times did we use the A word after Frank Vogel got fired? Accountability, accountability, accountability. And then Gambo reported, and everything we heard from like former players and such, like Budenholzer is a guy who might not get along with everyone per se, but he is an accountability guy. And all these indications that we've gotten and what we watched on the floor more so was clear and evident that he had zero accountability with this team, or he attempted to have accountability and they just didn't respect him enough to actually take in that accountability. So that's where next year, it's not so much about that word, but it's like you need to find the right personality type, basketball mind, whatever it is exactly, to have Devin Booker and a bunch of guys buy into the style of play that you want.
Yeah, but of course, it begs the question, is it possible to hold these players, this particular group, accountable? And I understand if you don't want to talk about Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal, because the Suns' future, it probably doesn't involve Kevin Durant and certainly doesn't involve Bradley Beal. Yeah. So we don't have to touch on those guys. But, Vogel and Bud were both championship coaches. And obviously there was that hit piece after Vogel was fired about how he came into the Clippers the locker room in that one loss against the Clippers and tried to give a fiery, impassioned speech. And at that point in the season, the players just laughed at him because they didn't respect him either. So, what a lot of people have speculated on is, does it need to be a former player? Because this is 2 championship coaches now. Is the only way to relate to these guys to give them someone who has truly been in their shoes? And do you give them someone who has truly been in their shoes because they would relate to that player and they would try harder for them, or because that type of figure might be even more likely to, the word I used, and maybe it's a little disrespectful, is coddle the players? Would there be certain figures around the league who would be a little bit more nurturing of a superstar player's ego? Let's be honest, right? So, I'm very, like, Gambo, your colleague, came right out today and said, Michael Malone, Taylor Jenkins, he doesn't see it happening. I think those are 2 fantastic coaching candidates for the Suns. Neither was a former player. I could certainly be talked into a number of former player candidates. I just don't want it to happen for the wrong reasons, I guess. And that's where we kind of have to do the thing we do every year now and spend weeks picking over every single guy with a fine-tooth comb. You
don't want a former point guard from the Detroit Pistons like that? That's a former player. There you go. How about that?
Former point guard from the Detroit Pistons. Who are you talking about?
Isaiah Thomas joke.
Oh God.
I make that joke.
I thought that was a return of Lindsey Hunter joke at first.
I made a Vinny Del Negro joke before
Chauncey
we
Billups, who just got
recording.
extended with Portland. Vinny Del Negro.
Seemed pretty interesting, the timing there, Sam. Seemed pretty interesting, the timing there of that extension in this news.
It did.
I don't make the Isaiah Thomas joke just to like take all this like low-hanging fruit now that the Suns are in the position they are. I make the joke because they are in that position now, Sam. Like, they are the low-hanging fruit of the league again. And to go back to, again, like the source of, I use the word pride on ArizonaSports.com. This is the 5th most winningest franchise in league history. I don't know if people know that. Like, this franchise,
I didn't know that. For a long time ago, they were 4th, and I remember I would quote it all the time out of my own source of pride and say, hey, this is the 4th winningest franchise in league history. And then like the post Dragic Bledsoe era happened, and after a while they plummeted, and I stopped quoting that. I would have figured they were like 9th by now. So it's a surprise to my ears that they're still 5th.
Still holding out top 5, but this would not be like them to go through like 2 huge droughts like this. Like we're anticipating this to be a couple of years out of the playoffs. Like that's what we're expecting. We'll see if they can. This is really the off season where they can try and turn it around. You, my friend, might be optimistic on Gambo's subtraction by addition by subtraction. Excuse me.
First of all, I absolutely do think there's an addition by subtraction theory, more so related to Bradley Beal than KD. Look, I've criticized KD at points throughout the season. I'm not like insane. I understand that KD's a very good basketball player. But no, I mostly say what you will about Ishbia. I have my doubts about Ishbia's ability to sustainably build a team that fits for the long-term future for the Suns. Absolutely. But I think he's going to keep swinging for it. He's going to keep them in the playoff race if it's the last thing he does. And there are all sorts of names, trade ideas we brought up on our podcast already, obviously, but it's going to get interesting.
Yeah, and that's, to me, kind of where I wanted to end this thing, Sam, because to go back to like the low-hanging fruit and the jokes that I'm making and all that kind of stuff, right? They are in a position now where they have had an embarrassing year, and they're one of the embarrassments of the league. Like that's just what they are right now, and that is what I mean. We're sitting there watching no one is watching that Kings Suns game on Sunday. No one. And Simmons is like firing off body language jokes while he's watching the Masters. Like it's just, that is the point to which they are being laughed at right now. And I just hope there is a certain amount of like responsibility taken with like what this franchise is and what it means to people to like be really sentimental here for a brief second. Cause again, just go to their basketball reference page, go through all these eras. Like you've got the Van Arsdales, you've got Alvin Adams, you've got Walter Davis, and you get into like the Hornacek, KJ, Marley, Barkley, Nash. And then you get to the tail end of that year. Then you get to the 2010s where there's a humongous gap, but that includes getting Devin Booker. Now you've got this Booker era. This is where you have to be careful, Sam. Like I'm going to say it. If they screw up again in this next year, why? I don't know why out of sheer blind loyalty. It would have to be a ridiculous amount of loyalty to stick around and watch them screw this up one more time and be the competitor that Devin Booker is. And I know there are people who want to see him traded right now, and I understand why. I'll have more words on that later this summer. And whenever Kevin Durant is traded, that's the expectation that he will. I'll have words later on in just terms of trading Devin Booker, what they should do with him, because I think like that idea and notion is something we're getting too far ahead of, because you got to see what you're able to do first before you make that sort of decision. Because I think you make that decision once you know, like, okay, this is what we got for KD. This is what happened when we did what we did with Beal. This is what we did with our other stuff. This is how the draft worked out for us. All those kinds of things, right? We'll see. But this is like for the first time now, I am legitimately like, it didn't really come to my mind at all in the last year or two, but that is where I'm at now, where I'm back to 2018, 2017 levels of not only the state of the franchise, but also how it impacts him and how long he's going to want to stay here. And look, again, if he leaves, you get all these draft picks, awesome. Maybe you get the Paul George Haul. Maybe you get extremely lucky and you get the Paul George Haul, which, by the way,
you don't mean literally Paul George, to be clear to people.
No, I mean SGA. I mean Jalen Williams, which, by the way, OKC gets a ton of credit for. He asked out, and they got lucky that he asked out, and they got that trade. Like I don't know if people talk about that much, but you have to hope that type of haul is coming. Not the MVP, one of the best players of his generation per se, but just getting two longtime cornerstones of your franchise in a trade like that. You'll be lucky to get one in that type of trade. And this is, again, I'm inching towards it slowly but surely, again, just out of patience in the content game and how many years we have to go of this probably, but we're just getting closer and closer to the abyss. I don't know if we're there. Are we hanging off the ledge of the abyss to sink into the abyss? I think we're like looking down at it and being like, oh, the crowd behind me, like, the scene in Game of Thrones where like all the zombies come around the ice and everything. Like the ice is cracking. I'm getting nervous. I need the dragons to come and pick me up.
I think we're looking the abyss in the face, but because we're Suns fans and because you and I in particular, we've seen this team over the past 10 years and what the team was with Booker before Chris Paul, before Ricky Rubio even, right? We've seen it before. We're well acquainted with the abyss. We were molded by the darkness, if you will. And I think we can come back from it. It's going to be a process, but you're right. I'm sympathetic. I'm open to the idea of a Booker trade as well. I understand if they have to listen to offers, but mostly I feel that if he leaves this franchise, it has to be on his terms. If he leaves this franchise, it has to be a haul that, like, if you screw that up, no amount of $2 hot dogs are bringing fans back. You could have negative prices on those hot dogs. A lot of fans aren't coming back, right? Devin Booker is the Suns. He is so emblematic. And, regardless of what a lot of people around the league say right now, they'll say that, hey, KD, he's got 1 year left. Bradley Beal obviously doesn't have really any trade value, but they'll say that you're in a tight spot. We'll see. We'll see how Houston does in the playoffs, Kellan. We'll see how OKC does in the playoffs. I think OKC is going to do really well in the playoffs, but we'll see. There are going to be teams in the next 3 weeks. I know it feels hard right now. The spotlight is on us today, but it's not always going to be like that. It's not going to be like that necessarily in 3 or 4 weeks, and then maybe some opportunities open up.
What I'll say on that point to what you're hinting at there is I think the Suns fans should be the most invested in any playoff game. It'll be that 7-8 game, because if Golden State wins it, I think they're going to beat Houston. And then that puts Houston in a really interesting position with where they're at, the crunch time offense that they are going to play in the postseason, Sam. I don't know if people are ready for it. It's going to get real ugly. It's not going to look great. They're going to have to grit and grind through a lot of games in order to get there. But just to state it bluntly and kind of not what we were talking around per se, but you can look at trading Booker. You can look at a complete rebuild. It's okay, worst case, this year doesn't go well. The moves don't go well. And you trade Devin Booker, you get a bunch of picks, whatever. Are you confident in the job that these decision makers have made over that 3-year period now where they could even execute a rebuild properly? And you're shaking your head. No, there's no reason to be confident. And that's more of the worry here and the concern is evaluating this front office and these decision makers, Ishbia, Bartlestein, Jones, again, the pie chart of who's making what decision, whatever, I don't know.
Ishbia being the most permanent of those 3 decision makers and obviously being the guy on top is the one that troubles me the most. I need some sort of I'll tell you what did bother me today, and we didn't even talk about it. Gambo referenced the fact that Budenholzer was fired today in a meeting with James Jones and Bartlestein, and who wasn't there? Ishbia should have been present at that meeting. He should have been able to look him in the eye and fire him face to face. Now, granted, there are coaches who have been fired under much more embarrassing circumstances recently in the NBA than a face-to-face private meeting. But
he could have been there too. I think Gambo could have potentially worded it wrong, but I think it was more of what we were hearing is that Jones and Bartlestein were still involved in a key decision that was made. That's the way I interpreted it, at least. But whatever.
What I was envisioning is a 4-person meeting: Ishbia, Bartlestein, Jones, Budenholzer.
Steve Nash?
They come in.
No.
Not Steve Nash. Just 4 guys. Bartlestein and Jones fire Budenholzer. He leaves. Door closes. Bartlestein fires Jones. He leaves. Door closes. Ishbia fires Bartlestein. He leaves. Door closes. Done. Game, set, match. One guy. But even at that point, Ishbia needs to be the one to take some accountability in all this. And to this point, we have not seen him do that. I would just love to see a public message from him, even if it's just I don't know, word vomit from a PR rep. Just some acknowledgement of his direct role in the disassemblement of this organization I would appreciate it.
I think we're going to see that. Now, exactly how the message is delivered, I don't necessarily know. We saw last year's version of it. I think that is going to be one of the examples, and I think something that I'm curious to ask him about if we do get the opportunity to ask questions whenever that press conference comes, which I'm just guessing, but I'm assuming it's going to come because we didn't even have exit interviews, for goodness sake. We didn't even get a final goodbye thing with the players. We just talked to everyone.
There wasn't even an official,
Friday.
You pointed this out to us. There wasn't even an official Dan Marley Hustle Player award given out on the last home game of the season. That's how embarrassed they were.
Did they tweet anything yet or no? Still nothing?
I don't know. I'll have to check. I'll check for you. I'll check after this.
I
didn't see
that, man. I didn't see it either. But to that point, what was I saying? Oh my goodness, I'm completely lost.
I'm not.
Oh no. Oh no, it's all in my hands. You're the guest. I'm asking the guest of the podcast to put me sort of where I am. Ishbia's message, right? Ishbia and sort of where he's going to be at. On Thursday. It's a guessing game of seeing there, but what I want to hear from and ask him, that's where I was getting, is the mistakes that he has made so far and what he thinks those are. I'm very fascinated to see what he thinks in terms of his own accountability, what he's learned from, because he told us when he got here, I'm not going to get everything right. I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to learn from them. And that learning over the next 3 to 5 years, Sam, is going to determine the future of this franchise for the next decade. Pretty much. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I think you should ask him how does he sleep at night directly. I bet he would really like that.
Okay. Yeah.
Personally.
Anything else?
No, I in all seriousness, I expect you to do a great job at that press conference, and we are going to need guys who ask direct questions to Matt Ishbia like that, because that's exactly the type of coverage I'm asking for. So yeah, we'll see. It's going to be a long summer, like I said, man.
So I got the inside track. I got Sam Cooper before the Timeline podcast even recorded. I'm sure you guys will get yours up before ours anyway. But it was a pleasure to talk to you, sir. Go ahead and plug away with what the listeners need to know.
We record a Suns podcast. It's called The Timeline. It's available everywhere except YouTube. We don't do YouTube. But find us, listen to us, or don't. I am so excited for the NBA playoffs, truthfully, Kellan.
Me too.
I'm a lot more excited now that I can watch with a clean, like sometimes what's happened to me in recent Suns playoff runs is last year after they got swept, or, after they lost to the Mavs 3 years ago now, you go through a period of mourning essentially, and it takes me like a round to recover. I finished mourning this team months ago. I've known that they were embarrassing for months. And so I feel like I can truly actually appreciate the basketball product on the floor for the next couple months. So that should be fun. Otherwise, we got the draft coming up. 29th pick. I'm excited for the draft this year, and then obviously we'll be doing a lot of trade ideas. We already have a lot of guys hitting the market.
You guys got to do a playback during the lottery. You have to.
I'm really, I would rather not, because that would be an all-time crash out. I checked yesterday and saw that the Rockets have now a 19% chance of a top 4 pick. That would be our pick. 19%. That is far too dangerous for me to, or maybe it was 18% or something. Far too dangerous for me to tune into that and not just have a stroke live on stream. I'm not sure the people need to see that.
Yeah, there were some, no one cared, but there were like random happenings where like the Bulls got super hot at the end of the year, so they moved up and made the Suns odds better. Like there were a couple of those instances where it was like, oh man, like it looked like only like a 7-8% chance was probably what they were going to land at a couple weeks ago, but then they went on that huge losing streak, and then teams like Chicago and Miami just kind of won enough for them to be in that position. I'm excited for the playoffs as well. I think part of my interest in wanting to see this get done expeditiously was just like, okay, can we get the biggest news of like this next month out of the way before the playoffs start, so we can just go full in on basketball. So I'm sure Kevin and I are going to be talking a lot about that. I'm sure you and Mike are going to be talking a lot about that as well. Thank you again so much for joining me, buddy.
Thank you. And Godspeed. You're doing important work, and it's a lot harder than what we're doing, which is mostly complaining. So good luck at that presser whenever it happens.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. Again, subscribe to all the podcast feeds, the YouTube channel, whatever you're supposed to like and rate and all that kind of jazz. I don't know. You could figure it out by now. Enough people looking into the camera like this tell you how to do these things by now. So you'll figure it out. You're a smart person. I believe in you. We'll be back with Kevin later this week, maybe next week, sometime around then. Goodbye, everyone.